Lauren Ornelas stepped onto the vegetarian path when she was in elementary school, and now she's been active in the animal rights movement for over 30 years, creating the wonderful Food Empowerment Project in 2007. Their mission is to create a more just and sustainable world for everyone by recognizing the power of our food choices. But Lauren and her colleagues also realize that it's not so easy for everyone to simply choose healthy vegan products, depending on things like how much money we earn and where we live. So, Lauren is here to talk about the ways oppression and injustice affects all beings and why vegans must extend our circle of compassion to understand the challenges that some of our neighbors might be facing when they go to make their food choices. And thank you for being here today, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start with food apartheid areas that you've identified in the United States. I think that's kind of made up a bulk of the work that you do there. And is that true? And how has the COVID situation sort of affected that work?
Sure. Our work is actually broken up into four different areas. So, this is one of the areas of our work. And yes, we have been working on lack of access to healthy foods in Black and Brown communities. We acknowledge that food apartheid also exists in Indigenous communities, but we haven't had the privilege in working in those just yet. But our work has found that when you look at COVID-19, one of the things that we believe has possibly happened is that regular people now understand what it's like to go to a grocery store and not be able to buy the food that they want to buy or food that's fresh because of what's happened with the pandemic. So we're thinking that people maybe have now seen what it's like because that is regular life for many people living in these communities where the majority of where they get their food is from liquor stores and convenience stores. So that doesn't always mean that it's fresh food or even affordable food.
That seems odd, like liquor stores and corner stores. I think you guys are trying to work with Safeway and Albertsons or boycott them or so. Are those the two that
Yeah, so basically, when we started doing our work, and we're located in the Bay Area, California, and so we follow environmental justice principles. And we were asked by one of the founding members, the Black Panther Party, to take a look at Vallejo, California, which, if you don't know the area, is basically, say, between Sacramento and San Francisco, and to take a look at the lack of access to healthy foods there. So we went in and we did a full assessment on the availability of fresh, frozen, and canned fruits and vegetables, as well as meat and dairy alternatives, and just took a look at the community and what it was like. And then we went back and we did focus groups to determine what the community found as barriers and what might be some solutions. But in doing our work, we found that Safeway grocery store, which had been located in downtown where a senior living facility was, as well as predominantly Black and Brown community members living, they relocated from that downtown and they moved several miles away. And when they left that community, they put what's called a restrictive deed on their former property, which prevented other grocery stores from moving in for 15 years. We've since found that this is actually taking place around the country by Safeway, which is owned by Albertsons and goes under other names like Bonds and Randall's. But this is a problem taking place across the United States where these companies are basically putting restrictive deeds preventing grocery stores from moving into communities, which greatly impacts the health of those communities. So at this point, we're not calling for a boycott, but we are asking people to sign the petition that we have on our website.
So how is that legal that they could do that?
When I first heard about it, a board of supervisors mentioned it at a meeting, and I was like, no, there's no way this can be legal. Let me have attorneys that I know take a look at it. And no, they found it to be absolutely legal. There's nothing, I mean, it may be corrupt and it may be, you know, I don't even know, completely unjustified, but these companies are getting away with it. They're literally getting away with harming the health of communities, which they in serve act as if that's who they're serving are the communities with plenty of good food, and they're actually preventing that in some communities.
So is it because they own the land so they can say we can do whatever we want with this land?
So basically, what they say is in the deed, whoever wants to buy that property has to say, when I buy this, I'm not going to turn it into a grocery store for 15 years. So in the community we're working in, as soon as those 15 years were up, grocery outlet moved in. But they had to wait literally for those 15 years to open a grocery store like that.
And the logic is because they don't want the competition?
I mean, we've tried to get an answer from them, and even the media has tried to get an answer from them, and it's really hard to figure out what it is, other than realizing that maybe they're, well, obviously it's corporate greed, right? I mean, that's the simplest way of looking at it. But maybe their feeling is that if they open up in these suburban areas, that people living, the Black and brown seniors, everybody's going to have to travel to go to the other store, but maybe the reverse wouldn't happen. Maybe the more affluent people wouldn't be going downtown, but the people who are in need are going to have to figure out how many buses to take in order to get to buy groceries.
And I heard something, someone said, was it in California? I can't recall, but they were saying that they're only allowed to take 2 bags on a bus?
That was somewhere, I believe, in St. Louis. We were contacted by somebody there who wanted help figuring out how to deal with these issues. And that's what they told us, that in some communities, yeah, only 2 bags of groceries are allowed on the bus.
Wow, and when we're already dealing with, trying to make fewer trips because we wanna self-isolate and protect everybody, that just makes it all the more difficult. Okay.
Yeah, and if you have a family, I mean, if you're already going to have like a 2-hour trip in order to go to the grocery store, and you think you're going to only go for 2 weeks and think you have enough food for your family, that's difficult. And a lot of the people we're talking about are time poor and cash poor. They don't have a lot of time and they don't have a lot of money either.
Right. Yeah, that seems patently unfair. Okay, so we can sign the petition. And now you mentioned that there's 4 areas of work. So what are the other 3 areas?
Sure. We work on veganism to encourage people to not cause harm to non-human animals, and if they have access to healthy foods, to go vegan. We have a variety of programs there, but we have 2 websites: veganmexicanfood.com, which is in English and in Spanish, and veganfilipinofood.com, which is in English and Tagalog, and we're currently working on vegan Lao food as well. We also work on farm worker justice issues. So we do that in a variety of ways. Soon we'll be starting our school supply drive that we do every year for the children of farm workers. And our other area of work is trying to get people not to buy chocolate sourced from the worst forms of child labor, including slavery. So we have a list on our website of chocolates we do and don't recommend that people can also download a free app and use on their phone.
Hmm. Okay, well, let's dive into some of those. But before we leave the first topic of discussion, the food apartheid, which some people, I guess, the government or the media coins as food deserts, you prefer to call them food apartheid areas?
Correct. The USDA terms it food deserts, but we feel that's very constricting when you're talking about a lot of different factors, that it's not just about proximity. It's also about is the food affordable? Is it culturally appropriate? Because in our work, what we found is one of the biggest barriers people have for accessing healthy foods is more about the cost. And that's why one of the things we really encourage people to do, if they're concerned about this issue and they recognize that it's an issue, it's an injustice that's taking place, and they want to help create more equity, is we need to fight for living wages. Because there will be no equity when people are having to work several jobs, when jobs aren't paying their workers enough money to survive. So from any local state ordinances that come along, or restaurant, fast food worker, Walmart campaigns to try and get people paid a living wage, we need to all be fighting for that.
Right. And when you are able to identify one of these areas, like for example, when the Black Panthers came to you, but if you identify other areas, how what's the interaction? How does it all sort of happen? Do you just go in
Well,
there and say, "This is what we're going to do for you"?
no, no, never. Again, we were asked by one member who was with the founding of the Black Panther Party to come take a look there. And what we did from there is we reached out to some community organizations, including Vallejo People's Garden that's based there, and said, would this work help you? If we did this assessment, would this help you in your work? And they recruited some of their volunteers, as did another local organization. And yeah, they were committed to it. And so we put out our findings, and more people got behind the work that we're doing. We have an event every year, which this year it'll be virtual, called the Vallejo Healthy Food Fest, where it's really just a celebration of the community. We serve free vegan food all day long. We have cooking demos that are culturally appropriate from people who are from the community, performers from the community, celebrating the diversity of that community. And so, yeah, I would be like, okay, do you want us to do this again next year? And we wait for them to tell us they do. But then we had focus groups, and listening from the community as well. And we worked with the local university for that. So we always make sure there's community buy-in. Even if it's just one individual who's interested, we must make sure that more people in the community, especially those that are working on these issues, think the assessments that we can do will be helpful for them. And what we do is we provide all the reports. We get extra reports printed for them so they can give it to funders and to grant makers to prove how important their work is on the ground.
I remember several years ago when I was traveling through the US with the Pastors for Peace on our humanitarian aid mission to Cuba, and we stopped a couple
Wonderful.
of different places in California, I believe, is where we were met by Brown Berets.
Oh,
And
uh-huh.
you're familiar with the Brown Berets, I guess? Yeah. And one of them, they were so excited to show us this community garden that they had organized. And they had somehow procured a small piece of land, and it was fenced and everything. And they just had all these great stories about how it changed people's lives getting involved with that. Yeah, gardening is good.
Yeah, there's a lot of beautiful stories about that, especially LA has some, San Diego has some, really showing how the community fought for it. The community fought to be able to grow their own food and a way to, reconnect with our ancestors and our cultural identities. And yeah, it's very beautiful. And thank you for being on one of those caravans to help Cuba.
Yeah, twice I went. It was the most life-altering experience. It was fantastic.
I bet.
Yeah, and so it occurs to me when we talk about colonization, right, and food, like the struggle to grow food. It seems so odd that we have to struggle to be able to grow our own food, and I noticed there's a really great article that Linda
Oh,
Alvarez
yes.
wrote for your website. It's really fantastic about the history of the first peoples on this land and how colonization impacted them. And I just want to tell you a little story about something that's going on in British Columbia right now, and just get your comments on that and anything else you want to say about this situation, which seems fundamental to trying to find food justice. So the Haida Gwaii people are one of the many First Nations in the area, and they have islands up farther north of where I am in northern British Columbia, so off of the coast of British Columbia, and it's quite isolated and it's very beautiful apparently, and there's ancient rainforests and mostly indigenous culture, but there's a fishing lodge. And I'm not sure who exactly runs the fishing lodge, but in Canada, we have pretty strict travel regulations, and we've started to move between borders within the country now, but we still are maintaining a closed US border for non-essential travel for perhaps obvious reasons.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I'm so sorry to hear what's happening to you folks. But the Haida Gwaii people are, and many Indigenous people in Canada are saying, you know what, whatever you guys are doing, that's great, but we've seen this before. We've seen your diseases. You just about wiped us out. And we prefer to keep our borders really tightly closed. And so, most people are respecting that, right? I mean, that makes total sense. But there's this fishing lodge in Haida Gwaii who is inviting sports fisher people to go, and it seems it's really horrible. And I watched, there's an indigenous led news organization in Canada called APTN, and they were showing like these people are even going to the airport in Vancouver and trying to talk to these people before they get on the plane to fly up north, and saying, can you just please understand what we're dealing with? And to
Mhm.
me, this just it seems like, colonialism, just, it never seems to end.
No, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I'm really sorry to hear that still that there's nothing that can be done to prevent those people from going up there. That's outrageous. But no, it hasn't ended, and I think that in other ways it's infiltrated everywhere because I think it's just so a part of how people think right now that they don't even know when it's happening. I'm part of the animal rights movement. And I think in some ways it's really infiltrated that. Again, it's just a certain mentality. But my ancestors are of the Americas. Um, and yeah, colonization had a devastating impact on us and our lives. And, as you read from that article about how, the Europeans, the Spaniards, didn't want to become like us. And that was why it was so important for them to bring their own foods over, which of course then means that's why on the fourth voyage, Columbus brought the cows over. And so, for many of us who come from colonized lands, why we don't really digest cow's milk. And interesting that any adult can digest cow's milk. But, as an indigenous ancestors and part of who I am as well, it's no wonder that many of us are what Food Empowerment Project likes to call lactose normal, and that there's nothing wrong with those of us who don't digest the milk of another species. Because that is been placed on us for too long, that like there's something wrong with us all the time, instead of recognizing that there's nothing wrong with Black and brown and indigenous people for not being able to digest the milk of another species. In fact, it was part of colonization that brought it upon us.
And I think that, in fact, many adults are like, most animals are weaned off of milk. And so, yeah, there's our bodies, most bodies in the world just stop processing the ability, something, I don't know, that I can't remember the science, but the ability to break down the protein, the casein protein, we sort of lose that ability naturally because nature wants us to wean off of. But for some reason, humans have decided, no, we're not going to do that. So yeah, it's perfectly normal and reasonable to not process. Yeah, so when we start thinking about like the source of all this, and just how natural and empowering it is to grow your own food, and somehow your ancestors went from being the caretakers of the land to being the people who provide the food for all the rest of us now, and
Right.
and suffer themselves for that. So the justice for farm workers, runs deep. And so I'd like to know more about the situation for farm workers, and what we should be aware of when we're buying food.
Sure. I think it's important, again, unless you grow all of your own food, you have a farm worker to thank for everything that you're eating. Vegan or not, it doesn't really matter. If you're eating produce and you didn't grow it, a farm worker harvested that. And farm workers in this country are now deemed essential workers, but they're not reaping many of the benefits of being essential workers. They've always been essential. They've always fed us. They've always put the food on our plates. And they unfortunately have been not treated well. The living conditions are not great because they get paid so little that many of them live, dozens of people in small apartments. They have to travel together to get to work on buses. And then when they get to work, it's not as if they have the best working conditions either. The average lifespan of a farm worker is 49 years old. So we're looking at how drastically this cuts their life short. Women are, dealing with sexual assault and sexual abuse in the fields. Many of the farm workers are homeless. They live in cardboard boxes. They live in pickup trucks, and yet they're picking the food that we eat, and they don't often have access to that. So that's one of the reasons why we do the school supply drive, is because we know they make all these sacrifices for their family, and the least we can do is thank them and give back. And we don't see this as an act of charity. We see it as a helping to right a wrong that's taking place, that we want to provide them with the school supplies so the parents or the grandparents have one less thing to worry about, and the kids know how special they are and how we too want them to succeed. When people go to the store in terms of like what they need to know what to buy, I think, it's when you think about going vegan, if you have access to healthy foods, you think, okay, I just don't buy that product, or I read the ingredients. But when we're talking about produce, it's not that easy. And so what we encourage people to do is to support those boycotts called by farm workers themselves. And so for the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, they're asking people to boycott Publix grocery store and Wendy's, because they won't pay a penny more per pound for the tomatoes that they pick. And we need to make sure that we aren't buying them, but also that we're using our voices to these corporations and telling them why we're not buying them. The Senquintin farm workers in Mexico are asking us to boycott Driscoll's berries because they're facing problems like wage theft and low wages. So again, it's great for us to not buy these, but it's equally important for us to make sure that we're telling the powers that be why we're not supporting these companies.
And are the working conditions and pay any better in organic situations?
It depends, right? I mean, there's only a very few number of farms that I know of in California that actually do right by the workers. Um, but I would say that organic just means that the farm workers aren't being doused with agricultural chemicals, which is an important thing, right? I mean, we don't want that either. But to not think necessarily that that means the farm workers are being treated better. But obviously, if you can buy organic, it's better for the farm workers. So it's good to
Um,
support that as well.
yeah, and I think ultimately it's better for the soil and the earth and the water and
Absolutely.
all of that.
Earth, everything, including ourselves. So
Right, right. Okay, so I want to know more about these backpacks that how many years have you been doing this for the kids?
I think we started it back in 2015. And we had been doing it where we had drop off locations and people could drop supplies off, and we had dozens of volunteers helping to fill the backpacks. But obviously, COVID-19 has changed that. So we are going to still be asking people to donate, maybe buy backpacks, have them delivered to us. But we found a site where we can buy prepackaged supplies, so there's less chance of contamination with us just putting all of the supplies in one into the backpack. So we're going to be asking people to donate to support that as well. And this year we're looking at trying to get like 540 backpacks for the families in need.
That's really great. And that's just in California somewhere.
So anybody can donate from anywhere in the world to our school supply drive. But the supplies that we're giving to are going to be in the farm workers in California, which are the ones who feed the majority of us in the United
Right.
States as well.
Right. And Canada too. Well, all right. Well, talking about COVID, I was listening to the Physicians Committee daily podcast today. Dr. Bernard was saying that to date, there are 35,387 cases, known cases of workers contracting COVID-19. These are slaughterhouse workers. 35,387 and 148 deaths. And even the inspectors who go in to inspect, so they're the safest of the safe. Apparently, they stopped reporting these numbers at the end of May for this group. But at that point, there were 200 cases and 5 deaths just among inspectors.
Mhm.
So, we're vegan and we don't contribute to the need for these workers and inspectors, but still we are working for justice for all, right? And
Yeah.
so,
And we also have farm workers who are also dealing with high rates of COVID-19 who pick our produce.
okay, I was wondering about that. Because it seems like the part of the problem with the slaughterhouses is that they're inside and they're working closely together and they're having to wear all this gear now, and it's not comfortable, it's hot and sweaty and that sort of thing. But farmers on the farms are agricultural, I would presume, are more outside. So I'm just curious about the extent of the spread among the outside workers. Do you know?
Well, it's more about the way in which they are forced to live and the
Ah,
way in which they're forced to travel to work. And the fact that some of them, if you look in the packing facilities, still aren't able to be, possibly maintain that 6 foot of distance. So really, again, we come back to the fact that they're not paid well. And since they're not paid well, they have to live so many to a house. And then when you have so many people living together, you're going to have more, instances where it's going to be easier to transmit.
right, because they all have their contacts that they're making. Okay, and
When
so,
you have 16 people in a one bedroom,
oh,
it's going to be hard. And then they're traveling to work and then they get to work. So, I mean, a lot could be helped if we could just pay these workers, all workers, a living wage.
And lower rent. I think lowering
Yes,
the rents would.
yes, especially, I mean, in California, I mean, obviously everywhere is really high, but California is extraordinarily high, and we're expecting these farm workers who happen to live, because let's look at the where strawberries are picked is, along the coast. So you have very high rates of living in those areas.
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't know what we can do about that, except sign petitions and write letters and.
Sign petitions, and yep, and keep speaking, keep wearing our masks for one thing. It shouldn't be seen the way that some people are seeing it right now, and so we need to wear our masks, be good community members, encourage other people to wear masks, and continue to educate any way that we can, and absolutely sign the petitions, encourage policymakers to continue supporting sick paid sick time during the pandemic for workers, and you know all
Is,
the benefits that everybody should be getting.
yeah. Are there any ways? Is anybody sort of trying to help facilitate either unionizing them or creating worker cooperatives?
So there are absolutely up in Washington State. There's a organization there that's been helping the farm workers to create their own union, which is really beautiful. There are unions in California as well. They're not the majority. And then you have a great organization like the Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Florida that really is about the workers advocating for themselves and agitating for their own rights. And they had to fight very hard to get Florida to even start testing for COVID-19 down in the Immokalee area. So there are unions, but there are also great organizations like that are really just gathering up and pushing for justice.
Okay, cool. And also knowing that the COVID can travel on food, apparently it's less likely that we're going to be contaminated from vegetables because those are typically rinsed and eaten immediately, whereas the meat packaging goes into the fridge or freezer where the virus stays alive. So,
Mm,
yeah, so uh, another good reason to just leave that out of the shopping cart for sure, I think. All right, let's shift over to chocolate then. We try to be good vegans and buy vegan chocolate, and there's more and more of that available now. But there's two things I think to be concerned about with that. One is palm oil. A lot of it has palm oil, which is really annoying. And then the issue that you're working with is actual real live slavery goes on in
yes.
Africa, West Africa, and Brazil, I think, right?
Exactly. West Africa and Brazil, where you have some of the worst forms of child labor, including slavery, taking place, where over 1 million children are victims of this. You have children as young as 7 years old using machetes to cut cacao pods out of the trees. Young kids trying to carry, 40 pounds of cacao pod bags. Uh, you have the fact that many of them are locked in overnight, so they can't escape. And that's when we're looking at, not even just, oh, is this slavery a form of slavery? This is slavery. You have children who are trafficked hundreds of miles from home, from poorer countries nearby like Burkina Faso and Mali, and they're trafficked for the cacao industry, and they don't speak the local dialect. They can't communicate, but they want to go home. They want to go home and be with their families. I mean, we're talking about slaves being liberated still, children being sold for $10 each. So this is outrageous for a luxury like chocolate. And so, yeah, absolutely. With vegans, we're like, absolutely, it's vegan if it doesn't have animal products, but it's not cruelty free if it's still at the hands of slavery and child labor. It's not. And we can do better, and we should do better. As vegans, we know why many of us have decided to go vegan, and that's not to contribute to suffering of non-human animals. And for many of us, thankfully, we also carry that onto human animals as well.
So Food Empowerment Project has created an app that is really very helpful. I find that very helpful.
Thank you.
And you update
Thank you.
that
Yeah,
monthly?
we update the list every month, and the companies have to make at least one vegan chocolate to make our list. So you know that every company on our list has at least one vegan chocolate, but we update it every month to add in new companies. And so if somebody sees a company that they love that's not on it, they can let us know and we can reach out to the company. There's also ways through our app that you can go up on social media and say something about the company maybe that you love and we don't recommend them and you want them to be more responsible about where their chocolate's coming from.
Yeah, I was happy to see that our local vegan chocolate, uh, Pure Love and Chocolates, is on your good list.
Oh,
So
excellent.
very
Yeah,
happy with
there's a
that.
great company in Canada called, I think, Camino Chocolate.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They are really good. I believe that they're a worker-owned collective.
Right. Yeah. Cool. So that's not just words on the label, because
No,
just because it says fair trade doesn't mean it is, right?
yeah, we don't really trust there's been too many problems with all the different certifications, so we don't go based on those. June 5th of last year, the Washington Post had one of the most recent articles talking about the problems with various certifications, including fair trade.
Well, that's good. Once things go mainstream, then hopefully more people will tune in. So speaking of mainstream, the Black Lives Movement Matter or movement, the Black Lives Matter movement um, has really, I think, kind of taken off in a new way. And I think maybe because people were home to actually witness what was going on and maybe tune into some podcasts that they might not have had time to otherwise listen to and get a kind of a new level of understanding. And I've heard from just sort of random sources that one of the fastest growing vegan populations in the US is among people of color. Have you heard about that?
I know that, yeah, I know that a lot of us are. I know that the most information I've seen is more about Black vegans and the escalation of Black vegans, which is fantastic. But I know that there's a lot of, Chicanas like me who are Mexican and Filipino community as well. When we launched vegan Filipino food, we had such, I mean, so many Filipinos who were interested in our recipes. So yeah, it's definitely growing.
That's awesome. And it's again, I think, a form of liberation, removing ourselves from colonization of the food industry that tells us, no, you have to eat these products to be healthy, but in fact, we don't. And I think a lot of food from Latina and Filipino cultures and African cultures is mostly vegan, isn't it? It's
It depends. I think it's really hard to blanket statement any of those, and I could definitely not comment on the other ones. I would say that my ancestors weren't vegan, but their diets weren't high in animal products, because again, a lot of the animals were brought by the colonists. But they probably did eat some turkey and some eggs and things like that, and definitely insects. But I don't know that it was definitely not to the degree that it is now. They did eat a lot of plant foods.
right. And just, I think the exporting of McDonald's and all the fast food around the world also has definitely contributed to, that's another level of colonization, I think.
Yeah, it absolutely is a form of colonization. Yeah, especially when the US tries to act as if it's the best country in the world and shames every other country. And pretty much what we've given everybody is very toxic food and products.
Diabetes, yeah.
Yeah, type
Yeah,
2 diabetes.
that's right. All right. So what else have we got going on? Is there anything that you're working on right now that you especially want people to know? We can contribute to the backpacks for the kids, and you've got some petitions on your site. What are some of the other issues that you're working on?
Well, we're working on the Safeway campaign
Mhm.
right now, so definitely still trying to put pressure on them. Uh, And we do have a petition against Chiquita, just kind of riding off of the wave of what's happening right now when companies are looking at their racist logos. We decided to reach out to Chiquita, which is a very, very problematic company in terms of colonization, treatment of workers, environmental impacts, you name it. But we have have a petition where we're just trying to get them at least to change their logo from what it is right now. And I think that, the Black Lives Matter movement has been really one of the most hopeful things that's happened, I believe, to this country in a very, very long time. And to see the statues coming down that just represent colonization and the um, decimation of Black and Brown and Indigenous people in this country has been really beautiful. And I know for me, hoping to see more of them come down in my home state of Texas, because I know it was not fun looking at school books and textbooks and seeing these people worshipped and seeing pictures of my ancestors being killed. So we are trying to, acknowledge that we can try to get Chiquita to be one of these companies to change their logo, but all of these corporations have a long way to go. And symbolically they can start, but they do have a lot of reparations to amend for.
Yeah, I wonder about bananas. I only buy the ones that say fair trade on them. Do you know, are those ones really fair trade?
So on our website, we have an amazingly written section about bananas. And we do have a few bananas that we recommend. And I don't know if you have it available there, but the most banana that we recommend is Eat by Equal Exchange. And they have just now made it to the West Coast, which we're very thankful for. But they're the most company that we feel comfortable recommending their bananas. On a secondary level, I think we have Grow, Coleman, and a brand that Whole Foods has called Earth University. But at this point in time, those are the only bananas that we recommend. Now, we haven't done a lot of research, like we're a small organization, so our bandwidth has predominantly gone into our chocolate list, but those are the banana companies at this point that we feel comfortable with. We do also have information on coffee and on wine as well, wine that is vegan, as well as treating the workers well.
Right. Yeah. Coffee is another really important one too. And wine, I remember boycotting South African wine.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, back
When
for
they were still vested in apartheid or more
right.
recently?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it had to do with apartheid. Yeah. So those sorts of things, those sorts of things, those campaigns can be very successful when enough people raise their awareness about which corporations are doing the nasty things, and we can refuse to buy from them, as you mentioned, and sign the petitions and let them know what's going on. Um, while we're talking about Black Lives Matter, I have a situation that I'm noticing, which is good, that there's this increased awareness and sensitivity I've noticed. So I had this conversation yesterday. Just it was one of those kind of chit chat conversations with somebody I don't really know, and I was mentioning, I just got some berries from the local farmer. It's such a great time of year, and she was telling me that oh yeah, she went and she got these wonderful tomatoes from this farm, and she was trying to remember the name of it, and it was out. She described where it was, and I said, oh yeah, I think that's the one it's run by some Asian people, an Asian family, and she, I guess, assumed that I meant this in a derogatory way or something. And she sort of said, well, I don't think it
Mm.
matters who runs it. And I tried to explain, oh no, I think it's cool. Like I admire when there's extended family involved in something like that. And, you can see the grandma in the back doing, whatever her part of the job is. But as an older white person, I don't want to I don't want to like I'm the white privileged person being shit on here, but um, I do feel like, not all white people are immediately racist and oppressive, right? And so I just want to, I don't know, I'm just sort of processing this.
I mean, I think that white people may have implicit biases and other things that they aren't aware of, just like, a lot of people will. For Food Empowerment Project, we actually have a list of 15 things you can do. And one of the things we recommend is when you go to the farmers market, try to support Black and Brown owned farmers. Because it is, they're going to be at a disadvantage than any white farmers will be. And so it's important to support them. And so I think that you can do that in a way that you're just trying to help empower and increase income for Black and brown farmers.
Right. And Asian farmers,
Yep,
right?
brown too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so, so this booklet that you've just put out is wonderful because it focuses on a lot of these things that we've been talking about, and then you do offer 15 things that people can do. Do you want to run through a few of those?
I don't have it in front of me, but I know one is going vegan if you have access to healthy foods, buying organic if you can for the sake of the farm workers, using our app and our chocolate list to help you buy chocolate, and you buying reusable, bringing your reusables with you wherever you can, your water bottles, your own utensils, to try to eliminate how much plastic we use. And going to the farmers market and supporting Black and brown farmers. Um, I can't think of them all, but those are some off the top of my head. And I think just always using your voice. And one of the things we talk about a lot is eating your ethics and making sure that what you're eating represents what you believe in and who you are. And so if you have access to healthy foods and you don't want to cause suffering to non-human animals, then stop eating them. If you don't believe in slavery and child labor, then don't buy chocolate that's sourced from those areas that predominantly have those things taking place. So I think that there's ways that we can make sure that we look at our food as more of a responsibility, and a privilege for us to have that responsibility. For many of us, that we do it several times a day, we eat, and so we can use those to help create power and help create positive change in the world.
Absolutely, we can. All right. And I would recommend that people check out your website, and your Facebook is wonderful. And foodispower.org, right?
Correct. Foodispower.org. It's fully in English and in Spanish.
All right. And thanks so much for taking the time today, Lauren, to talk to us.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Is there anything else you want to say before we go?
No, that's great. I think, just reminding people that they can make a difference and to not be overwhelmed by all of these issues, but look at them as opportunities to make the world a better place.